Hi there, it's the Middlesized Garden early summer garden tour, and we're going to look at how you can save money and have a gorgeous display with hardly any effort by using self-seeders, but also what the problems might be with that. So there's always a but in everything, isn't there? And also looking at some summer tips that you can use so that your late summer flowers will be abundant and gorgeous and bushy and won't flop over. But before we get on to the tips, I'll just explain a bit about what the garden's like here. The Middlesized Garden is a walled town garden and it's about 100 foot long. It's L-shaped with an 80 foot wide at its widest and 40 foot wide nearest the house. And we're in southeast England in Kent, which would roughly equate to a USDA hardiness zone of 9B or 8A. And it has actually been really warm for us recently. It's been up to about 23 Celsius, maybe 73 Fahrenheit quite regularly. But most importantly, it's been incredibly windy. We haven't had any rain, but the combination of no rain and wind really dries the soil out. So that's the time when you really have to start watering, and I've had to be watering every day, and even so, the ground is like a brick. So the big story in this garden in early summer is self-seeded plants, and I love self-seeded flowers. They seem to be the gardener's dream. I haven't planted them, I haven't paid for them, and I haven't looked after them. But, and there is always a but, they don't suit everyone. I think this is all part of discovering your own gardening style, because the thing is that I am a very poor weeder. I tend to think, oh, I must do the weeding, and then something happens and I don't go, and by the time I tackle a bed, it's absolutely packed with weeds. This allows self-seeders to thrive. However, people that do stay on top of the weeding, who do it regularly, probably spend less time weeding because the weeds just don't get the chance to come up, and as soon as they do, they're off and they're out. So I would never say that my way is better than the proper weeder's way. And I really noticed this when a friend of mine who lives just 3 doors down from me and is a professional gardener said, oh, I never get self-seeders in my garden. My garden doesn't get them. Well, it's not her garden that doesn't get them. Her soil's the same as mine, her aspect's the same as mine, her weather's the same as mine, and what's floating in the air is the same as mine. But she is a brilliant weeder and I am not. And the other advantage to being a brilliant weeder is that, of course, the plants you do buy have a chance to thrive, and quite often I will buy plants and they just get choked by what's going on in this main border. So, you know, there are pros and cons to everything, but just at the moment I love my self-seeders. And so if you're interested in self-seeding, then these are the plants that have done well for me, although it's really worth remembering that actually it may be different in different soils, in different climates, and a plant that self-seeds happily in one climate may not self-seed in another, or alternatively it could get very invasive. And certainly amongst the self-seeders are plants that are considered too invasive to have in gardens in some areas. So it might be worth checking that for your area. But what have we got here? Well, euphorbia has been fabulous. I've got one euphorbia that spreads and the other that self-seeds, and the two are slightly different. But this certainly, euphorbia oblongata, self-seeded. I planted it here from seeds about 15 years ago. It's just raced about the garden since. I've mentioned Cerinthy in a number of videos over the last 2 months. It is just fantastic over April, May and just the beginning of June. The bees adore it. It's a very pretty blue flower and it self-seeds very freely for me. Another self-seeded plant I adore here is the wild gladioli, or Gladioli communis. Now this gladioli has been in this garden probably for about 100 years. I met somebody who was born in 1937 in this house, and he remembers these plants in the garden in his childhood. So they may have been here for even longer than that. And I just love them. Lychnis coronaria, or I think red campion is its common name, that's another self-seeder. I planted maybe 2 or 3 plants here about 4 or 5 years ago, and it just sort of wanders around the garden and parks itself wherever it likes, as do foxgloves. I've always found that the foxgloves I've actually planted have never really done very well, but the foxgloves that choose to live here arrange themselves in all sorts of gorgeous places, and they seem to be very considerate on the colour theme as well. The alliums in this garden, I bought 15 alliums, which are either Purple Sensation or the slightly paler Purple Rain, probably about 10 years ago, and this is really what I've got. And then the fatter, bigger alliums are called Allium Christophii, and once again there was one of those in this garden about 15 years ago, and there's now great rivers of them. Plants that grow in the cracks of pavings can be lovely, and I think seaside daisies or erigeron is one of my favourites. And also Alchemilla mollis is another one, which is not quite in flower yet, but it just sort of wanders around the garden and pops itself down anywhere you choose to leave it. Campanula or Canterbury bells is another good self-seeder in most gardens. I really don't take a lot of notice of it here, but it does its thing. And of course, earlier in the spring, just beginning to go over now, is Smyrnium perfoliatum, which is a very vigorous self-seeder and has a lovely bright green look, rather like euphorbia, but without the poisonous sap. And there's one little mystery in the garden, which is that I think that this is Daucus carota or wild carrot, and it's something I have wanted for a long time. But to be honest, I don't remember planting it. So either something I wanted has chosen to live in this garden, carried in the wind, or a kind bird, or I've planted something and completely forgotten about it. So I'm not quite sure where that leads me. But anyway, I think it's Daucus carota. I think it's wild carrot. If you do recognise it as wild carrot or not as wild carrot, then please do leave a comment below, as I'd be really interested to know what it is and how it got here. So what about the jobs that you can do now to make sure that your late summer flowers don't flop and you get more of them? And the two that I am doing this year are the Chelsea chop and pinching out my dahlias. Now, I haven't actually done either in this garden in the past, but I definitely noticed that my asters and Symphia trichum were much more floppy last year than they were the first year they were planted. I imagine perhaps the first year they were planted, perhaps the grower had done the Chelsea chop. The Chelsea chop is good for flowers that flower later in the year. Things like Nepeta, which is catmint, Echinacea, Helenium, Phlox, Sedum, Penstemons, and of course here asters and Symphia trichum. At this point, I would like to give a shout out to Beth Chatto Gardens on Instagram, which is at Beth Chatto Gardens, because they've been doing some really lovely gardening tips on IGTV. And I think I saw the best Chelsea chop description on there, which I will now show you. And they use shears rather than secateurs. That's very much your own choice how you prefer to do it. You're cutting the plants down by about a third. And Beth Chatto advice is to shape the clump a little bit and to cut them at the front a little bit lower than you would, which I think is really sensible. And also there will be some plants that haven't quite grown up and you'll miss with the shears. So go back and chop those with secateurs, because otherwise you'll get a few that sort of come up really tall and others that don't. Many people only Chelsea chop half their clump of flowers, so they do leave half of them to flower earlier and be taller, and then the others to clump out, flower later but have more of them, and that of course extends your flowering time. But I think I'll just go for just the one height. Now, in the same vein, in other words, to stop your plants sprawling and to give you more flowers, there's pinching out your dahlias. And pinching out your dahlias is a bit different. You go and pinch out the growing tops like this, just when they're about 16 inches high. I have to say, I'm prepared to do it a little bit earlier than that. I think you should just use your own judgment as to when you think your plants are ready to be pinched out, but certainly end of May, beginning of June, maybe even middle of June if you live in a cooler climate. Now what you want to do is you find, now here we are, right, top leaves, this is the bit we're going to pinch out in the middle. And so I am going to take some scissors and just pinch that out. So gone. And the other thing to do with the dahlias at the moment to stop them getting leggy is to look at how many stems are growing out of the tuber, because you shouldn't have more than 5 stems. And if I look at this dahlia, I can see that there are in fact only 4 fairly strong stems coming out of the tuber. But if I look at the other dahlia on my other side, I can see that there's quite a few little stems and some of them are quite weak. So I'm going to snip those out as well. And of course, when we talk about dahlias, we talk about slugs. I find that dahlias only really need protecting from slugs when they first emerge. I think once they get to this size, I mean, the slugs will nibble them, but I'm kind of prepared to share because I think slugs are part of the whole cycle of life and they obviously provide feed for the birds. But I do use slug deterrents and I use them in the veg patch. And I've been trialling a new one which is based on diatomaceous earth, which is called Envii Feed and Fortify, which was sent me for review. And I've used it round this courgette and it's been actually very good. The idea is that the powder actually irritates the slugs and snails underside, so they don't cross the barrier. It's a barrier method, and it also feeds the soil. I'll put a link to that in the description below, along with the Beth Chatto Gardens Instagram feed. So what I feel this garden tour has been very much about is how important it is to develop your own gardening style, because there's several ways of doing things, and it's the one that works best for you. It's the most comfortable for you. It gives you the effect you like. And one of the ways of really developing your own gardening style is to go around other people's gardens. And of course, that's been a bit limited recently. So I put a playlist at the end of this video about private gardens that you can go around. So with any luck, that'll give you some more tips, ideas and inspiration. And do subscribe to the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.